absolute worst tonight? Governor Kristi Noem. You know, the one who welcomed Orange Julius Caesar to Mount Rushmore last summer for an Independence Day event in the middle of a pandemic, but only after taking his lead and leaving social distancing and masks optional despite the virus because freedom! Well, according to financial disclosures last month, Noem gave you-know-who a $1,000 bust depicting him on the stone idol to presidential colonizers last year because she knew it was something that he wanted to receive. According to her office, that gift was paid for by private donations, but Noem has found herself under scrutiny over her other acts of supplication to the MAGA cult leader and his minions. All the travel she did on behalf of the lead singer of New Sedition and other Republicans. And what it might have cost taxpayers. Noem made 19 trips last year on behalf of Trump, or as a surrogate for other grand old partiers. Quite the roaming Noem, if you will. You see what I did there? That prompted South Dakota lawmakers to pursue a bill making the cost of her security detail while traveling public. But the measure was killed nearly 2 weeks ago by, wait for it, Republicans. Other aspects of her national travel fixation are also raising eyebrows, including her request for $5 million to upgrade her state's aircraft fleet. And according to a new report from journalist Daniel Neuhauser, published in Raw's Story, newly unearthed flight logs show Noem used a state airplane to travel to right-wing political events around the country, a possible violation of state law. Those trips include out-of-state events hosted by groups such as the National Rifle Association, Turning Point USA, and an organization affiliated with the late GOP mega-donor Sheldon Adelson. According to the analysis, the flight logs appear to have had nothing to do with her Trump campaign-related travel. Instead, this travel all occurred in 2019. Noem's office claims that all of her 2020 campaign travel took place on commercial aircraft or on planes paid for by other campaigns, that her flight records were no secret, and that her 2019 speaking engagements were in her official capacity as an ambassador for the state of South Dakota. In the true fashion of the man she claims not to want to succeed in 2024, the statement also dismissed the reporter and lawmakers who have sought to scrutinize her travel as basically a left-wing cabal. The journalist who broke the story, Daniel Neuhauser, who she says is part of that cabal, and one of the lawmakers who's been looking into the roaming Noem, will join me after the break. South Dakota's Republican Governor Kristi Noem is raising all sorts of questions with her prolific travel over the last 2 years. I'm joined now by Daniel Neuhauser, freelance reporter whose investigation into Governor Noem's travel was published by Raw's Story today, and Democratic State Senator Reynold Nasiba of South Dakota. Thank you both for being here. Daniel, get us into these flight logs. Do they show? Do they sort of prove that Kristi Noem was using the state plane as like a personal aircraft, or is it vague? What are you seeing in those logs?
I wouldn't say that. It's certain that the aircraft was used to pick her up when she was living at a residence different from the governor's mansion, and also in one case picked her up from her daughter's wedding at a state park far on one corner of the state to then go do business around the state and then come back. So it's not as if the plane was shuttling her back and forth to the Capitol or anything like that. But reasonable people can ask questions about how much extra it costs taxpayers for her to be living somewhere else. And then there's, of course, the things that you mentioned before, seeing the NRA, flying to talk Turning Point USA, speaking to a group of the Republican Jewish Coalition with, coincidentally, some very big GOP donors in there. Again, reasonable people can ask questions about whether the state's needs were served by these trips.
And Representative Nasiba, isn't there a law in the state of South Dakota against the governor using the plane essentially as a personal aircraft?
Yes, there is, Joy, and thank you for having me on tonight. 15 years ago, so back in 2006, there was an initiated measure number 5 that said we want to limit the use of the state airplane to state business, because then Governor Rounds, now Senator Rounds, was using our state airplane for his own personal purposes and political purposes. When we put that before the people of South Dakota, they voted 55% to 45% in favor of limiting the use of the state airplane to state business.
And it's state senator. I always have to give people their honorific, so I apologize for that. So, but then to stay with you for just a moment, state senator, then why does it seem that legislatively Republicans have defeated attempts to put some more restrictions on, your governor's travel?
Well, I think that after that law passed back in 2006, I think then Governor Rounds was just more careful about using the state airplane, and Governor Dennis Dugard always wanted to keep himself beyond reproach, so he didn't use it for personal or political travel, as far as I know. But this governor uses the airplane a lot more and travels a lot more, and doesn't seem to be embarrassed by it at all.
And she, right, Mr. Newhouser, it does seem like it's more aggressive. If the governor presumably knows what the state law is, her office essentially just insists that all of these are for state business, that all of these trips are for state business. Is she filing some sort of reports to try to account for this travel?
Not that I know of. And maybe that's where, with respect to the state senator, the law might be a little deficient here. Who's to say what's state business and what's not? If she says that an NRA conference is state business because one of the first law actually that she signed into law was a concealed carry bill, and she's promoting the state's interests, then there's not really a venue that I know of to prove that otherwise. But again, I mean, it is indisputable that most of these questionable trips that I wrote about in my story were for right-wing organizations, Republican partisan organizations, and so again, if it's state business that is partisan in nature, well, then so be it. But again, you can ask questions about whether the state's needs are served by these trips.
And Senator Nasiba, is there, we're having this big debate about whether the former president needs to be held accountable by the law, if indeed he broke the law. Could we be seeing the same kind of questions begin to be asked in the state of South Dakota about the governor?
Right. I think we could. And there's at least a couple of bills that are still alive in the state Senate. One is a bill that would basically require quarterly reporting about the use of our state airplane. And that would be a report that would come back to the Appropriations Committee. So there would at least be some legislative oversight. I mean, that's what a legislature is supposed to do. We're supposed to be a check and balance on the executive branch, but that hasn't been happening. And then there's a second bill that I have coming up on Wednesday that even when the governor does travel, and I think she should always have security with her, but I do think we should know what it costs. If the taxpayers are paying for her to be campaigning in Maine or in Georgia, I think the taxpayers should find out what it's been costing us to provide security for our governor.
Do you, well, I'll start with you on this, Daniel Newhouser. Do you have any reporting that some of this travel is related to maybe her preparing for a presidential run? Do you think she's doing this to prepare herself to run for president?
I think it would be too far to say that for certain. But what I will say is this is not an uncommon situation, especially for governors. It's a high-profile position. There's a natural tension between maybe a state wanting to be a little bit more guardful and mindful about how money is spent, and somebody looking to raise his or her profile. We've seen these same kind of stories about many, many governors of both parties, California, New York, Oklahoma, and I think it's always worthy of at least asking the question, especially if, and I don't know that there's going to be the case here, that she wants to seek higher, but if she does, how exactly are they spending time in their current office?
Daniel Newhouser and State Senator Reynolds.